This evening I want to begin with a short reading, and this is a quote from someone. He was Austrian, and I'm sure I'll mispronounce the name. Franz Jägerstätter. He was actually well known during World War II. He was beheaded because he refused to fight in Hitler's army. And I first found out about him through this quote that I'm about to read. And as I read about him, was he was jailed, and he was given a chance to take back some of his attitudes and to participate more, be more supportive of Hitler's regime. But he knew he was going to be executed if he did not, and so he made a conscious choice. So he was a Christian, so the language here is Christian, but I think it points to something, regardless of what traditions we come from. So let me read the quote here. Does one then no longer want to see Christians who are still able to take a stand in the midst of darkness in deliberate clarity, calmness, and confidence, who in the midst of tension, gloom, selfishness, and hatefulness stand fast in perfect peace and cheerfulness, who do not merely watch to see what comrades or friends will do, but instead only ask themselves, what does our faith teach us about all this? So I want to come back to that in just a bit. I think it's pretty striking. And he's really talking about what we often talk about here and in the Buddhist or Dharma traditions, about being connected with and informed by and living in attunement with our intentions. And we don't really know. I'm sure he had his struggles and his ups and downs, but he was pretty extraordinary. And again, he was willing to not even be executed rather than live in a way that just went profoundly against just the foundation of what was important to him in his life. So I want to come back to that. I was reflecting on this quote in particular because I was remembering this quote in particular because today I was reflecting that just given how challenging of a time we're going through now, and there's been plenty of challenging times in life and in the world, but today in particular, I was having a conversation with my brother. I have two younger brothers, and I have actually a great relationship with both of them. I'm fortunate. We like each other. We actually like to hang out together. We like to talk. It's really everything's positive. In the realm of politics, we're very, very, very different, and we have gotten into conflict in the past. Don't so much anymore. But today, after I was talking to him for quite a long time on the phone. He doesn't live here in California. And something came up about politics, and I didn't really want to go in that direction, but he was talking about how certain news sources that I consider to be mainstream news sources, he considers to be very biased left-wing news sources. And so we started to get into that a little bit. I realized that this conversation was not going to go anywhere. And we've been through it enough that we agreed that, look, this isn't going to solve anything. It's not going to be a productive conversation or even that interesting of a conversation. So let's just stop. And that was fine. And then a little while later, I get an email from him, quite extensive email with many quotes and links to click on, proving his point. And it's kind of like that, regardless of what we think in the world, we can find plenty of evidence to support our view. Um, and even in the Buddhist world, let's just narrow it down. Buddhism is quite a big world, and there's many, many schools of Buddhism and different traditions that are actually sometimes you can't even recognize them as having much in common with each other. And that's true. Going back to a source, but then having diverged over millennia in many different ways. But let's just narrow it down to Theravada Buddhism, which is, I think most of you know, that is one of the only living, of the early schools of Buddhism, it's the only living tradition from the early schools. And even with Theravada, there's people joke and say there are Dharma wars, and it can get quite. It's amazing. People are quite committed to their view, and I've been engaged in that a lot, and on certain topics, I can prove to you that I'm right. I can show you quite clearly. I can bring up the old text and everything, and then someone else can come and, you could just within Theravada in the old source Pali texts, the many, many different views there that are contradictory, you can find evidence to support all different kind of views. A lot of that had to do with the way things evolved, that it wasn't all written down in a cogent, systematic way. It built this kind of hodgepodge over the years, and in some things there is contradiction. So, you can go in those directions. So I think the Buddhist world itself is not immune from this. And so I was reflecting how much more so it can be in the secular world, and especially in this crazy time we're in. This talk is being recorded, so if someone's looking at it in the future, this is about 7 weeks before the 2020 presidential election. And, it's intense out there. And it's not just, of course, all the politics, but there's everything that's been going on with historic wildfires. I was, as with many people, my wife and I have been thinking about, well, should we move out of California? And then there's, of course, the question, well, where are you going to go? So, it doesn't seem like there's any refuge to be found there. And everything going on with the turmoil around so some of the reckonings that are happening these days around social justice. And these have rolled around from time to time in our history. Well, we're back in one now, and it's quite agitating. And some of these reckonings, I think, are well overdue. But that all of that's going on, and just everything that we're all dealing with on fires and smoke and climate change, and then of course we're in the coronavirus pandemic right now, and what's going on with the economy. So all of this, and we've been talking about it in recent times. Actually, we've been talking about it for at least 6 months. It seems like we just cannot find a refuge anywhere you look. And so then on top of it, what I was thinking about with my brother is like there are, I think there's plenty to be found of places of connection and community with people and love, but there's also a lot of difficulty and hate and suspicion, and we really seem like we've broken up into sort of tribal groups, and it's hard to even, for many of these groups, hard to even talk to each other or relate, and this is, of course, in everybody's mind these days. And so it made me go back to Franz Jagenstater's quote, because one of the things that struck me is that it sounds like a cliche in the Dharma world, but I think there's a lot of truth, as there are with many cliches, that what's needed is at least hopefully some of us can step forward and with a mind and a heart of love, and not being so pulled around by circumstances, because it's easy to fall into agitation and hate. And so that sounds nice. I don't know how it is for you, but for me, I say, yeah, I want to live in love and um, stay connected with my intentions, and yeah, that's what I'm going to do. And then it doesn't take much, and I can still feel the agitation will come up. Just the email I got from my brother, it wasn't that big of a deal. As I said, we have a great relationship. I sent him back something humorous, and just to try to just keep it like that. But a little bit, I had that feeling, and I wanted to sort of engage in. It's not a physical battle, but sort of engage in battle with him, and I felt the tension of it. And the polls are just everywhere. And I haven't met anyone who, even people whom I respect a lot and people who have been some important teachers for me over the decades, who are sincere Dharma practitioners and deeply practiced, um, have shared about their own struggles. And I don't know anyone who says they're so untouched that they kind of ride above all the choppy waves, or they don't get buffeted around in the surf because they're so equanimous. Maybe there are some people out there like that, but I haven't met any who don't claim to be touched by these things. And sometimes we can be touched in a way where we're touched and we don't feel the agitation of it. We feel it, but we still have a sense of balance. But we can also um, be touched in a way where we get embroiled in what's going on and caught up. And so, of course, this has been a theme of many Dharma talks wherever you go, is how do we meet what's going on? This is what we're called to do in life. And I don't know if what we would call normal times versus particularly acute or intense times is different. But it's I think shining a light on it's harder to turn away during these times and find a way to turn. There's less places to turn away and not have to look at what's going on. When I used to teach in prisons, which I did for a number of decades, and I was quite aware that when I came into the prison, and people would often ask me my advice about difficult situations, and I had to be very respectful because I was aware that in 2 or 3 hours I was going to leave. I was going to go home, and here were men who weren't walking out. And if there was some conflict among different groups or gangs or with guards or whatever it was, or just their own inner suffering with themselves, um, it was different for them. They didn't have the luxury to like skate away, to turn away and not see. Where for me, I could go back out and leave, and I still, if I was willing to stay open and receptive, there was plenty of areas of where my mind was liable to fall into ill will and create suffering, clinging, reactivity. But it was also easy to find places where I could be distracted and where, it felt like life was okay. So there's something very powerful that can happen during those times. And many of the men in the prison have shared with me, I'm not saying everybody, but many of the men in the prison did share with me over the years, the very fact that there was no getting away. You had to find a way through, or really just be crushed by what was happening. You didn't have the luxury that they wouldn't have chosen that. And of course, they'd like to get out of prison, no question about it, even the wisest and most enlightened of them. But the fact that they were there, it was the very fact of being forced that there were, I don't know what the percentage is, but there were at least a few of the men who really kind of found a way through and kind of out the other side in a way that was quite transformative. And so here we are, and even if it's not all the difficulties in the externally that I just have been mentioning, that we've all been talking about, seems like forever, even in good times, we all have our own life circumstances, our own suffering. We all know that that's true, depending on what's going on, whether it's something we're dealing with on ourselves, someone in our family, loved ones, local community, whatever. Even in what we call good times, I want to be very respectful, and I acknowledge that For some of us, maybe we never have had a time to get away from the difficulty, whatever it is, dealing with some chronic situation. So then the question is, how do we use what we have? One of the things I've often said, I think in Dharma practice, it's very common because of one of the models we use is what's called the Four Noble Truths. And I think most of you who I know, there's a couple people on right now whom I don't recognize, but most people who I've known a long time, we all know what the Four Noble Truths is. It's what incorrectly gets translated as life is suffering, which is not accurate. I don't want to go off into that too much, but it's the truth of the suffering that comes from clinging, and then what gives rise to that, and how we can find a way to free ourselves from that process. And if you don't know the Four Noble Truths, it's easy to get more thorough explanation on it than that. But for now, I don't want to go into that, except to say that because of that, and for other reasons, we put a lot of emphasis on opening to our suffering, turning to our suffering, coming to know our suffering, because if we want to free ourselves from suffering, then of course we need to understand what is its cause, and is there an ending, and what would be the way to lead to the ending. But you have to understand it. How do we understand anything? It's through experience. And so there are many respected Dharma traditions that actually go and seek after suffering. And that may be a good path for some people. It's not a path I've found. I think for many people, they already suffer so much that I'm of a path to let's try to be kind and caring and take care of ourselves and find as much ease as our bodies, our minds, and our life circumstances will allow. And we don't need to worry about it because plenty of suffering will come and find us, for all of us. And the trick is, so we use the good times, and we can appreciate and know how to create a sense of ease in ourselves. That's important. Knowing everything that's not wrong in us, and that's not the right word, but that's not broken, all the places that work well. And to know those and have some fluency and facility with that is very important. We need to be able to turn to that. But it's only half the equation. The other half is, of course, we do need to understand our suffering. So it's both sides are important if we want to have the full picture and the full path. So I think the trick then is, even if we're not consciously looking towards suffering, we're also open to what's good and wholesome and pleasant and feels good and right. We still, I think, are being asked to stay open and receptive when the inevitable suffering comes. And I think one of the things many people I've heard share, I think a number of people who were on this session here this evening, I've heard say in this group that they're very appreciative of their Dharma practice because of the qualities that they've developed in themselves of mental stability and calm and the ability to let go of their clinging, to let go of their suffering, and the ability to know the difference between being reactive about something and being responsive. All right, that's not the same thing. Right, you get to feel the difference there. We want to respond appropriately in the world if we want to make a difference for ourselves and for others. But that's different than a reactivity that comes out of our conditioned habits of mind, which oftentimes aren't always what's going to serve us the best. So that's why we do these practices. And a friend of mine once said he thought of Dharma practice as it's like lifting weights. And the way he said it's like lifting little weights, so then when it's time to lift the big weights of life, you've had some practice around it. And I like that idea. Of course, sometimes just sitting quietly to be with yourself, even if you don't have any other agenda, it doesn't feel like lifting little weights. It can be hard. It feels like very big weights just to be with ourselves. And that's one of the things, of course, in meditation, you're probably all practicing in different ways. if we're cultivating what we call concentration and steadying our minds and learning to open our hearts. But regardless of what we're doing, one piece for all of us, if you sit down quietly, you are learning how to be present with something, with your own mind and body. And that's an amazing, a powerful training. So hopefully, whether we're newer to practice or we're old timers, we bring the best we have. That's all we can do in any moment. But even for people who've been practicing a long time, it's so easy to fall into a reactivity when we lose our mindfulness and we just get caught up in what's happening and we forget. But when we can remember, if we can fall back to our intention, but it's not only remembering our intention, we actually have to be willing, even if it doesn't feel like it, to let go of what's pulling us away from whatever our living according to our deepest aspirations or intentions, and to actualize it the best we can. I've had times when maybe something's happened, maybe I've gotten in a conflict with my wife or something, and I'm right, and doesn't she see that I'm right, and I have the whatever, and I've got the feeling of it, and I'm irritated, and regardless of whether what can happen is, of course, the energy of that can be a strong pull, right? And I can wait until the energy subsides, and that's one thing, and that's oftentimes an important thing to do. But sometimes, even when the energy's there, if I remember my intention, it's like right now is the time to let go. I can still process and take care of things, and maybe I am right. Maybe I do have something I need to say, or maybe it's I let go and I need to hear her more. Whatever it is, I don't have to stop bringing a wise response. But if I can remember that I don't want to be living in ill will, even when the energy of it is that, I'm right, or whatever, even when I don't feel like it, I've got to have a willingness to let go. And so that's why I think not only training ourselves, the training to me, and this is really the main point I wanted to bring this evening, to me, there's two, it's kind of an artificial way of speaking about it, but just to make the point, there's the one side of the training, which is the formal practices we do, whatever it looks like. Here this evening, I think most people were, not everybody had their video on, but most people were in some kind of sitting posture, or maybe a few of you lying down and had your eyes closed and were doing whatever your practice is. So we do these formal practices where we carve out time to specifically cultivate qualities of our hearts and minds. This mental cultivation is what it's called, is the word, bhavana in the Pali. So we do all of those, but it's not only so that we can remember and actually, after we remember, have the ability to let go in the rest of our lives. That's a big piece for sure. But it's actually being all the rest of life, what we call daily life practice, it's actually the training itself too. It's not that we do these formal practices to help us then meet life. How we show up in daily life, of course, is the training. And so if we're being buffeted by life, as I've certainly been feeling buffeted, I have to tell you, with on top of everything else, just with the wildfires and the intensity of the smoke has been, I don't think maybe you've been somewhere in the world where it's been this bad, but I haven't I think it's been a month, just unrelenting, this air. And that's been an amazing training right there, because the feeling of it has been so oppressive, especially, say, if you don't have an air conditioning and maybe you get into triple digit heat and you can't even open your window because the smoke's so bad. I mean, that's pretty intense stuff. And there are plenty of people who went through that, at least for a few days when it was really hot on top of everything else. So that's an example of, okay, that's what's actually happening here. I don't think it's going to stop being unpleasant. But the question is, how do I work with this? How do I let go? And it's in the doing That's the learning. And in my mind, it's not even so important about how well or poorly we judge. The more we're able to let go, the less we suffer, for sure. The more we're able to live in it with our hearts open rather than closed off in reactivity or ill will, it feels better. And it creates less suffering for ourselves, but also for everyone we're around. And it informs all the choices we make in life. So I think, when we do, as a way of speaking, when we do better, we have to be careful about judging it like this. But yeah, it's better, sure. But regardless of how we shows up, that is actually a time for learning. And it's actually the practice. And even if we feel like I can't do this and it's just beating up on me and it's kicking me and it's jumping on top of me and I can't even find the way. If we can actually, then the question is, well, how do I be with whatever it is, confusion, anxiety, fear, ill will? Maybe the letting go, it doesn't make that go away. Sometimes we think we want to let go, do what's happening, but we're really telling this nasty old experience to go away. And that's okay. We want to find ways to let the difficulties go away, but sometimes the answer is actually we always want to start with whatever's real and true. Well, if you're not able to find a way to let go or not able to find a way out of your suffering, that's the starting point right there. That's what's actually happening. And so we then have to back up, whatever's going on, we see if we can be present with it. Can I let go around it? And if I cannot, what's stopping me? That's the place to look right there. And then sometimes we don't know, we're just in confusion. Okay, how is it being in confusion? This is what it feels like. It's like this. Can I let myself be? And maybe sometimes right there, just turning the light of awareness on what's happening of mindfulness is enough. Or we may see something, a place that's blocking us. And when we do, well, let's bring our mindfulness to that. Can I be with that? No, something's blocking me. We keep backing up until we find, is there anything I can be present with? And eventually, I think we can all find something. And it may feel feeble or not like much. It can seem that way, but we do the best we can. That's bringing something I think I'm going to talk about in more detail at another talk, but I'll just say a little bit, it's bringing what I've called the experimental attitude. And I just want to mention it for tonight. I won't go into too much, but I'm planning to be here next week, and unless circumstances change, topics for talks can change depending on what's up, but I'm planning on talking about this idea of experimental attitude a lot more next time. Plans can change, but that's the plan. What I mean by the experimental attitude then is, I'll give you an example. I'm doing some chemistry experiments with my son. We have a little chemistry lab set up, and we're trying to see if we can capture carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere chemically, and then actually store it off in some cylinders and actually have captured a little CO2 just for an experiment. And we've been doing, we're making progress in figuring out the chemistry, and I think it's looking like we're getting there. But to start with, we had a number of fails in our experiment. We said, okay, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to look for the pH. If you don't know chemistry, it's like how acidic or basic, that's the pH level of our chemical solutions. pH wasn't changing. We did a lot of other things. It wasn't working what we thought was going to work. But we kept going because we just learned. So we brought our best understanding of what we thought was the right thing to do. We did a little research on it, just like we do our practices, and we research ourselves. You bring your best sense of what to do, and then depending on what's happening, you apply yourself in the best way you can. And in my mind, if we don't have success, if you will, the important thing more than anything is look to see what actually happens. And depending on that, that can inform what's needed next. One of the things I do often when people come and want to talk about their meditation practice, this is the exact attitude I often bring. I don't have some of you have worked with me and done interviews with me around meditation, and I don't have a one-size-fits-all meditation instruction. I have some basics, and we want to get clear we want to head, and then we start in a certain direction. The whole thing is do some of these practices or methods. Let's look to see what happens. It actually doesn't matter what happens or not. If it doesn't work, that's fine. We need to have some patience, because then we look to see what actually did happen. Then it can inform what's needed next. And it reminds me of the quote I've said. Some of you heard me say this many times. It was the author E.L. Doctorow about writing a novel. But I use it about, I'll just substitute writing a novel. I'm going to substitute it for living life, or you could say Dharma practice, is like driving a car at night. You can only see as far as the headlights, but you can complete a journey of 1,000 miles that way. And I actually think that's quite a powerful quote, because life is like that, right? You can't know more than you can know, and you can't see more than you can see, or be more aware than you could be aware. But it's amazing that it's enough. It really is. And I don't just mean that as sort of feel-good platitude kind of talk. I mean, it's literally true for every one of us. Bringing the best we can, and then we learn and see a little more. And the idea of the experimental attitude is that we're willing to have the patience and the presence for whatever happens, and not bring in the reactivity or the clinging as part of the process. So we don't want to, basically, we don't want to create more suffering along the path meant to lead us to less suffering. So keeping all of those pieces in mind, I hope the best we can. We just do the best we can. We don't have to be any good at this, but just doing the best we can to try and stay open to the present moment. Try to bring the best tools we can. And then I want to come back and just end. I'm going to read one more time Franz Jägerstätter's quote, because the way it's stated in this quote is such a high ideal of perfection. But we just want to do the best we can to keep our intention in mind, and let that, then that's part of the experimental attitude. What if we can stand so in alignment with our intention, and then bring that to meet the flow of our lives, whatever it is, and then we look to see how we're doing. And that will inform what will help us stay more attuned and to actualize our intentions more. So I'll just end with reading Franz's quote one more time. Does one then no longer want to see Christians who are still able to take a stand in the midst of darkness, in deliberate clarity, calmness, and confidence, who in the midst of tension, gloom, selfishness, and hatefulness, stand fast in perfect peace and cheerfulness, who do not merely watch to see what comrades or friends will do, but instead only ask themselves, what does our faith teach us about all this?